Hey, what's up guys? It's Corbin again, and today we're going to be going over the basics of video. This will be covering pretty much the general stuff about video, from the video dimensions to the frame rate to the data rate to what video codec you should use. So we'll get started by going over the video dimensions. This is usually referred to as the resolution and the aspect ratio. So the first thing I'll go over is the aspect ratio. This is actually pretty simple. It's just the ratio of the width of the video to the height of the video in pixels. So what this means is you're going to take the width of the video and the height of the video and look at it as a fraction and then simplify it. For example, 1920 by 1080 is standard 1080p resolution. If you simplify that down as a fraction, you can simplify it down to 16 by 9, and that is the standard widescreen aspect ratio for American television. Standard tube TV aspect ratio would be 4 by 3. That's that kind of squarish video that you see. Instagram uses a 1 by 1 aspect ratio by standard, so that's a perfect square. And here are some cinema aspect ratios for like movies and stuff. 1.85 to 1 is American cinema widescreen, but that's not to be confused with anamorphic widescreen, which is 2.39 by 1. That's used in American movie theater projectors. One that's really wide is 2.75 to 1, which is Ultra Panavision 70. That's used for very wide shots in movies, such as panoramas or looking out over a large horizon. Now looking at resolution, this is again the size in pixels of a digital video. Standard widescreen resolution for a streamable video that you would watch on YouTube is 1920 by 1080. On Instagram, they use a square version of 1080p, which is just 1080 by 1080. And that means 1080 pixels by 1080 pixels. We just shorten it to that kind of terminology of 1080 by 1080. Standard resolution for television nowadays is actually 4K now, which is 3840 by 2160. That's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So next I'm going to go over the frame rate. Put simply, video is made up of many still images that are displayed one after another. The speed at which these still images are displayed is called the frame rate. For example, 30 FPS would be 30 frames per second, or 30 still images displayed in 1 second of video. Typically in American movies, you will see 23.976 frames per second, rounded up to 24 frames per second. Typically, you would want a frame rate of 24 FPS if your video is trying to look cinematic or professional. Standard American television, so like reality shows and stuff like this would use this, is 29.97 or 30 FPS. A reason that you might want to use 30 FPS for your video is if you're trying to capture fast-paced motion that might otherwise get a little bit lost in 24 FPS. An example of this would be a video about a fight or something like NASCAR racing. Standard video game recording frame rates for playthroughs of video games that you would see on YouTube would be typically recorded at 60 FPS. Some common frame rates that are used for slow-motion video recording on a camera would be 120 FPS and 240 FPS. These are numbers that are divisible by 24, so that there's no stuttering when the video is played back in slow motion. So now let's talk about how the data is stored. So the first basic principle is the data rate. The data rate is how much data is actually stored in every second of video. Usually this is measured as megabits per second. So as the frame rate and the resolution increase, the required amount of data streamed per second is also going to increase to maintain an acceptable amount of quality in the video. Here's a chart of YouTube's recommended data rates based on the resolution and frame rate of your video. This is a pretty good chart to go by, and I recommend pausing the video and taking a screenshot. Now let's talk about what you're actually using to store that video, the video codec. Compressed video codecs like H.264, which equates to an MP4 file, and HEVC, which stands for High Efficiency Video Codec, or H.265, those are both lossy video codecs, meaning that data is being removed in a very careful and calculated way in order to reduce the file size while still producing an acceptable image. You can only take away so much data before the video becomes unviewable and highly compressed. Typically, in the two codecs that I just mentioned, H.264 and HEVC, you can choose how much data is kept or removed. You do this by either increasing or decreasing the data rate in megabits per second. Usually, again, the higher the number, the more data there is, and the higher the quality. A higher data rate results in less compression and therefore less lost data and a higher quality video. But a lower data rate results in more compression and therefore more data loss and a lower quality video, but also a smaller file. Now, uncompressed codecs like AVI and MOV animation do not remove any data, and the data rate cannot be adjusted without changing the actual resolution or frame rate of the video. There is no data loss in uncompressed video codecs. However, the file size on uncompressed codecs is very large compared to compressed codecs like MP4. Some uncompressed codecs store the data more efficiently. For example, you'll notice that MOV files are actually a lot smaller than AVI files, but they contain the same data, just stored in a more efficient way, or rather in a different language. Some uncompressed codecs also allow for an alpha channel to be stored, meaning that they support transparency, like a PNG but for videos. You would want to use this for, say, an overlay for a video, such as an animated logo that you want to put in the corner of your video, or an intro or something like that where you'd want to have a clear background to the video. MOV animation is one of those codecs that supports RGB plus alpha. You can see how to export an MOV animation using RGB plus alpha in the link down below where I show you how to export video from After Effects. So the important thing to remember is that the standard codec, nowadays at least, for streamable video is H.264. This will be an MP4 file. The standard codec for video with an alpha channel is MOV animation, like I said. Now, why would you want to use an uncompressed file versus a compressed one? Well, put simply, compressed files are easier to stream and upload and download because there's only a fraction of the data that needs to be sent by the server and downloaded by the viewer's device. Uncompressed files are best for recording and editing video, though, because there will be no data loss until you export the final video for uploading to a streaming service or viewing by the public. This means that the video will be the highest possible quality until you actually export it to, say, an MP4 file. So that's just about it. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'll see you in the next one.